Yeah.
I'd be recognized.
You're recognized.
I would like to begin my first hour.
All right.
And I want to just go on record to say that I support this legislation. I think a lot of Representative Allman. But I want to, anytime I get the opportunity to do some information sharing with my colleagues, I think that that is a worthwhile opportunity. So there was a report that came out from the Economic Policy Institute yesterday. And the name of the report is The Evolution of the Southern, y'all wanna hear this? You wanna hear this? The name of the report is The Evolution of the Southern Economic Development Strategy. And this came out from the Economic Policy Institute. And it talked about how it is rooted in racism and economic exploitation. And this is part one. And the summary says, and this all ties together, housing, wages, all of these issues are interrelated. And it says how the Southern economic development model has failed to create shared prosperity in the region. And so I just want to share some key findings from the report. From low wages to unfair tax policies to a weak social safety net, the Southern economic development model ensures that businesses continue to have access to cheap black labor even after the abolition of slavery. This past weekend, I went to Gee's Bend, Alabama, where my ancestors are from. I had the best catfish sandwich you could ever believe. And it was great. And Gee's Bend is famous because of the quilters there. And that's what they quilted for economic prosperity. Many times I've gone on record to talk about how my ancestors, my great-grandparents in particular, were sharecroppers in Gee's Bend. And they had this annual tradition called the May Day. It's wonderful. If you've ever been to the May Day, I'll encourage you. There are vendors, there are food trucks, there's a softball game. But I was able to reflect on how my ancestors toiled and how their lives have been relegated by the Southern Economic Development Strategy. And I want to say that though I am not a sharecropper, and I'm a state senator, I'm grateful for what my ancestors went through. The remnants of sharecropping is still in my lineage. So I just want to talk about, we're connecting workforce housing to wages. Many people cannot afford to live because of the low wages in the South. Is low wages. 20 states still use the federal minimum wage of $7.25, and half of these are states in the South. On top of struggling low wages, many Southerners, particularly black and brown Southerners, have trouble accessing unemployment insurance and other benefits, which are often inadequate. And policymakers have worked to limit Southerners' rights to unionize, to bargain collectively, since unions make it hard to keep wages low and benefits stingy. I just talked to the gentlelady from Mobile County, and she talked about how her dad, they were able to have a little economic prosperity because her dad worked for the railroad and they were a part of a union. The Southern economic development model cannot create shared prosperity. And to uplift wages in the South, we need policies that raise wages, make taxation, because we're talking about taxation, make taxation fair, and strengthen the safety net and protect workers' right to unionize. This part of the full report, I just want to share some elements that I highlighted. And these are the states that were included in the report. I'll get down to that on which states were included, which states were considered the South. You spent some time in Virginia, so Virginia's included in this report. Washington, D.C., though not culturally Southern, it is considered geographically Southern. You have a comment?
Yeah, I think you get much north of Fredericksburg, and I'm not sure that's still. I'm not sure that's still the South.
I understand, and it says many states across southern United States utilize an economic development model that prioritizes business interests and the wealthy over ordinary citizens. This model, which we refer to as the Southern Economic Development Model, is defined by low wages, low taxes, few regulations on businesses, few labor protections, a weak safety net, and the fierce opposition to unities. And it talks about how the work we have to do with our economic development model and how it is fundamentally flawed as a strategy for improving living conditions for most Southerners. We do have a workforce issue in our state, but we have to deal with it in a meaningful way that uplifts all people, not just big businesses. When I ran for Senate, I ran as a populist. I am a populist. I try to do what we can for the least of these, for the common man. This report describes the Southern Economic Development Model in detail with the historical evolution of various components of the model. We show how politicians and the wealthy across the South have used racism and drawn on the notions of white supremacy to divide the population along racial, ethnic, and economic lines. This has prevented Southerners from coming together in solidarity to demand policies that will uplift everyone in the region. That is so important. It is so important that everyone is uplifted through economic policy. I want to share how the brief history, the origins of the model developed as a way for the wealthy and powerful to ensure continued access to labor, cheap labor, following the Civil War. And that we see that today, how we keep wages down in this state. This report defines the South as Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, Florida. I didn't know Delaware was considered the South.
It's not.
This report is kind of off in that respect. Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland. That goes back to that culturally, but situation geographically they are. Mississippi, they are definitely the South. North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. So they pretty much gave 16 states and the District of Columbia. We really need to explore the Southern Economic Development Model because while I support business, I support innovation, we need to make sure that we're doing it in a socially responsible manner. So I want to just talk about low wages and how as a state, we need to work to improve wages. We can have all the economic development bills in the world, but if we're not working to improve wages systemically, then all of our efforts are for naught. Many states across the South promote low wages for many workers by the policies they implement, in many cases, the policies they choose not to implement. For example, 5 southern states, this is Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina have no state minimum wage at all. Can you all believe that Alabama has no state minimum wage at all? We need to do something about that. Because the federal minimum wage is set at $7.25 per hour, $2.13 per hour for tip workers, all workers across the South are supposed to be paid at least these minimums. I want to talk about low corporate and income taxes for forced reliance on regressive tax sales. And the report found that today, Southern politicians, business interests, and other wealthy Southerners continue to seek or eliminate severely limit corporate and personal income taxes. I wasn't here during COVID-19, but it shares an example how several states, Southern states, use temporary budget surpluses resulting in the distribution of federal dollars to states intended to address COVID-19 and the recession as an excuse to further cut low taxes. Again, I wasn't here specifically. Oh, yes, it does. These included Tennessee. In 2019, sales tax accounted for more than 40% of all state and local tax revenue in many southern states. These included Tennessee at 56.6%, Louisiana, Florida, Arkansas, Alabama, 48% of our tax revenue is regressive, comes from sales tax. Tax on poor people who are barely making it. These shares are substantially higher than the 34% of state and local revenue that sales tax account for nationally. So as Alabama, we're at 48%, while the country is only at 34.4%. This approach to taxes means that public services are underfunded. What do you think about that, gentleman from Baldwin County?
I think we're trying to help the exact same people here.
Okay, I like to hear that. Proponents of this tax model argue that it increases the incomes of all households by allowing them to keep more of their money. Further, they argue that it allows businesses to reinvest and grow their businesses, therefore increasing tax revenue. But this regressive approach to taxes simply means that there is not significant revenue to properly fund education, health care, public transportation. We just voted down the opportunity to expand public transportation in this state. Water and sewage. My district is in crisis. People do not have clean water, working sewage in my district. I represent Dallas, Lowndes, Perry, Wilcox, Clark, Monroe, Butler, Connecticut counties. Nobody in this Senate, nobody in the House represents as many counties as I do. Nobody. But if we had better infrastructure, we'd have better population and more job opportunities. A weak safety net. The Southern Economic Development Model. How much time do I have, Mr. President? How many? I have plenty of time to go through this. This is a good report. A Southern Economic Development Model is further characterized by a weak social safety net. Most Southern states offer relatively few and weak protections against hardship for individuals, families who suffer some sort of economic shock, such as a loss of a job, illness, or need to care for someone. Workers have setbacks. We need to have a social safety net to protect them. This week's social safety net cements low-income Southerners to precarity. That keeps you uncertain. You know, there was an article that came out that most Americans can't even afford a $400 emergency. Further disempowering the labor force by making any economic shock all the more harmful. A Southern worker typically with little savings, private savings, is more likely to take or endure exploitive or underpaid work. That goes back to my point about how we need to be fighting for higher paid jobs and skilled workers and ensuring our kids have access on the front end. Oh, I remember this. Southerners face greater insecurity when they lose jobs. Oh my God, because we are a right to work state. So your boss can come in and say, you're fired, no reason. And then it's hard to get unemployment insurance. What does that do for our workforce? Unemployment insurance is a crucial component of the social safety net, meant to ensure that families have economic security in the face of a job loss by replacing a percentage of prior earnings. So what happens when, we get the tax credit, we have this workforce housing, they lose their job? What happens to these families? Will they be relegated to poverty or homelessness? Because we have a homeless crisis. What happens?
Well, they'd certainly fall below the income requirement at that point.
In closing, and I have some more. If I have another opportunity, I want to share some more of these stats. Our state, I want everybody to hear me right now. Our state is at a crossroads, okay? And as my grandpa Stewart, he's 85 years old, he would say, are you going to barbecue or are you going to mildew? You ever heard that term before? Yeah, you go barbecue or you're going to mildew. We can pass all the workforce bills that we want, and I support this legislation. I want to go on record saying that I support this is needed, this is essential. But until we address the systemic issues, the generations of systemic failure, we create an economy that shares prosperity and not extract and exploit from low-wage workers who are disproportionately Black, we will not reach our full potential as a state. And our full potential will be yet to realize. Also, our young people will continue to leave this state in droves, never to return. Thank you, and I yield.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Stewart.